All right, peace. I'm feeling bold today. I got time, so I want to go ahead and knock out the other part of this. So we went through, I was reading the description of Jesus of Nazareth according to Raw in the Law of One in the last part of the lesson. So if you didn't see that, go ahead and check that out. But at the end of that one, I was talking about how these frequencies that are associated with the earth facilitate the same frequency that allows us to experience the other side even while we're living. And so now I will be hitting the whiteboard to focus on some of the linguistic and mathematical implications that are communicating this same message. All right, so as I told you, the difference between the nasal sound that we make that vibrates the cavity of our skull and then stimulates the central axis of that, where the pineal and all that great stuff is it ultimately allows us to imitate the harmonic of the next octave. And so if you know anything about music, you know we have, as far as those white keys go, you got the 7 notes. So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Well, that 8th one is another do. So we start off with do, and then we end up with a do, with a do. I thought a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, 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 do. All right. So that means we're going into another cycle. So in other words, we come back around to 1 whenever we hit 8. And so that's essentially what you're seeing happen when I demonstrated before with the 2 squares. Remember the doubling up of the square root of 2, which had to do with the throat. And then it reaching out to be in black, which was the square root of 8. So you see all of that is coming full circle. So if you notice with that number 133, that's 19 times 7, those are the first few digits of line 3 of Meru Prastara, where I showed you what the significance of the 33 is with regards to the supplanter. Now remember, Jacob's brother Esau, his name meant to become Herod. So we've got a situation similar to what I described a couple of lessons ago, where they were talking about the natural direction of human evolution was something toward, what you would think like a Sasquatch or something would look like. But then you had something else happen. So that's essentially what that dichotomy between those two is pointing to. Now, we've got to look at what the significance of that Jacob story is. We already know the relationship of his ladder to, Pascal's triangle and all that. And so, what's the difference between this 7 and 8? Besides what we've already covered, we need one more in order to make this into a cube. So remember, each line has to do with a different projection of a cube. And then here in 3rd density, we have a cube. So 2nd density would be a square. 1st density would be a line. And 0 density, none whatsoever, would be a point. That's space. It's potential. Okay, so anyways, we established that the ones on the end are related to supersymmetry, and that the stuff that's in between the ones that go down the edges of Pascal's triangle, the ones represent supersymmetry. So anything between it is the break of that supersymmetry, what physically manifests as a result of breaking from that supersymmetry. Okay, so in order to balance this, so we got this Allah God situation associated with the 7. In order to move to build or destroy, now mind you, in the supreme mathematics definition of Allah God, it says that God is the wise man's equality. Hold on a second. Let me go ahead and, I forgot I turned my sound back on. Let me put it on do not disturb. So anyway, so it says God is the wise man's equality. This is to build or destroy, and build or destroy being 8. Wise man's equality, so wisdom equality, is pointing to the number 26. So the concept of wisdom equality, born to build or destroy. So automatically in your head, go ahead and connect the concept of build or destroy with this number 26. Wisdom equality, that means to have the same actions, the same speech and everything. Okay? And that will add on to life or take away from life. So that is describing something akin to cymatics, where no matter who summons that particular sound, the object will still respond to it because it knows how to answer to its name. So remember, the square root of 7, we associated that with infrared and heat and phonons. So that's basically sound. So sound, pressure, heat, changing the pressure. That's the difference between whether something is water on the ground versus water in the firmament. The difference between the water in the lake versus the water in the clouds. That we collectively call that heat. And then remember, the symbolism surrounding that was the serpent. So that's the one with the knowledge, but not the wisdom. And so this is the exact same concept that Ra was describing with regards to fourth dimensional Jesus, without that fifth density wisdom of being able to clarify what he said by living longer. That means ascending to the next level is what we're talking about with the blackness. Now, if we still follow the same path that we described in the earlier lessons regarding what black represented, if heat is infrared, that means we're moving into microwave with black. And I don't know if you knew this, but they call the background of the universe, or the space, the cosmic microwave radiation background. So that radiation that exists from the beginning of the universe, that's still lingering around, and that signal. And let me tell you something crazy. I remember the approximate time that I even learned about this concept, and then what we thought to do with it when I was in school. So this was in high school, and it was in the class Theory of Knowledge. So if you were in IB, you had to take this class called Theory of Knowledge, and this is where I learned a lot of the foundational things regarding like philosophy and Plato and all kind of stuff. So shout out to Mr. Kirby, Central High School, class of 05, y'all. Macon, Georgia. But anyways, so in class, it was myself, I can't remember, what's my boy name? I can see his face right now, but it was a group of us sitting around talking, and it was something about this cosmic background. So it came up that the frequency associated with the cosmic microwave background radiation was still present. So like the sound of the Big Bang, quote unquote, is still reverberating throughout the universe. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I say, well, you would think that if somebody, like if you built a machine that is able to match that frequency, like if that frequency is everywhere, if you built a machine that can match that frequency, technically you could amplify. So mind you, we had one of our science classes right before we went into this class. So we basically got fresh physics and science and stuff in our head going into a philosophy class. So, but what it came together for me was, if you match that frequency, you could basically create another Big Bang. And this is me not realizing That is the exact concept behind the chanting of Om. You're essentially trying to match the frequency of the frequency that created the universe in the first place, and you know you've matched it by if your body resonates. So it's like, so you're not creating the sound to the amplitude that would be necessary to create an entire Big Bang, but you are essentially creating a Big Bang in your own body. You're basically reminding your body of the frequency that created the universe in the first place. So this was me coming to this conclusion when I was like, when did we have that class? So 17, maybe. I think you don't have that till like 11th grade or 12th grade. I don't know. So I was around 17, 18 years old, somewhere around in there. I had this seed already in place, but it wasn't until like within the past couple years. Like, I'm about to be 40 this year. It took another 18 years plus some change for me to understand what Om actually was, and taking it out of the perspective of trying to make something happen way out there, the edge of the universe, and then realizing that the universe is within us. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the evolution that took place there. But okay, so case in point, so you've got this concept of heat, and then you've got the background. This is what we're dealing with the number 8. Now, if we continue on, let's see here. So if we continue on here, and we go, so we were dealing with 19 times 7, and we go on to this 19 times 8. You know what, y'all? Hey, I ain't even gonna lie. This is this real life right here, so we can talk. Let me flip this camera real quick. I gotta use the bathroom, but I don't want to stop what we're doing right here. So for a quick little minute, I told you that we had this. So that I was watching some videos that I was talking about earlier that were like, it's wild that they would even talk about this today, because it was so relevant to what we were talking about. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna let you watch one of those real quick while I take care of the personal business. It's all natural, baby. Don't worry. Okay, hold on. Let me go. Let me see. So I can go back to my previously watched videos so I can remember where this. Come on now. Chromebooks suck, y'all. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Like, why you want to mess with the status quo and try to make things different from, you know, yeah, you have your feelings about Windows or whatever else, but then there's a thing called compatibility. And Google, I love you, but some of your stuff is just not compatible and workable. Okay, so where is my... I want to see my previously watched stuff. Oh, that's the video right there.
And society, created by some of the most...
All right, so check this guy out.
We'd like to thank Morgan & Morgan.
I'll be right back, y'all.
PBS. Take a look at this. Looks a lot like the American flag, right? So what's it doing all the way over here in Africa? You may have learned in school that the US founded Liberia, but the story is way messier than you heard. That's thanks to the organization behind this colony, the American Colonization Society, created by some of the most powerful people in America. Their mission was to get free Black people out of the country and send them anywhere else, like Liberia. This idea was hotly debated. Was it a mass deportation scheme or a new path to freedom? The movement had a truly wild range of supporters, from black abolitionists to white enslavers to presidents Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Abraham Lincoln. Over several decades, public support for the society rose and fell and came roaring back again while everyone argued over colonization and a question we're still fighting about today: who gets to be American? So how did this organization attract both abolitionists and enslavers? Let's take a look at who founded the American Colonization Society, or the ACS, in 1816. These men came from the highest levels of power. They were congressmen, clergymen, a Supreme Court justice, and apparently the lyricist of our national anthem, Francis Scott Key. The ACS founders were very concerned about the rising population of free black people. Since shortly after the Revolutionary War, this population grew 215%, from 59,000 to 186,000. For comparison, the enslaved population had only increased by 70%, though it was much larger. Most free black people had either bought their freedom, fought for it through military service, or escaped to the North, where states had abolished slavery. The way to deal with this growing population, according to the ACS, was, quote, to promote and execute a plan for colonizing, with their consent, the free people of color residing in our country in Africa or such other places as Congress shall deem most expedient, end quote. The ACS pitched this to potential white members, and it resonated across party lines. Even respected black abolitionists like wealthy businessman James Forten and Minister Richard Allen offered their cautious support. However, ACS member support was subject to certain conditions. For example, abolitionists insisted that colonization could only happen with free black people's consent, while enslavers made the society promise not to promote or even mention emancipation. Ultimately, there were three main things that united white ACS members. The first thing was a core belief. They believed that racial prejudice in white society was too deep to overcome. The members reasoned that their plan was benevolent. They were actually doing the best thing for black people by sending them somewhere they could have equal rights. We'll get to what the majority of black folks thought about that in a minute. The second was fear, although they feared different things. Enslavers were afraid that free black people would inspire and help enslaved people to revolt, especially after notable insurrections organized by Gabriel Prosser and Denmark Vesey. Abolitionists, on the other hand, feared social disorder, something they thought would happen if black and white society were integrated. The third and least controversial thing members agreed on was that colonization could resettle enslaved African people recovered from slave ships, since the transatlantic slave trade was now illegal. However, they would send African people to a new colony and not the lands they were captured from. It was this last goal that also won the crucial support of the federal government. In 1819, President James Monroe, for whom Liberia's capital Monrovia is named, gave the society seed money to officially start a colony. For the next 47 years, 37% of ACS funding came from the government. In 1820, the first ACS ship set sail on the Mayflower of Liberia, carrying 2 federal agents, an ACS agent, and 86 free black colonists, mostly from New York and Pennsylvania. They headed for Sierra Leone, the British colony for resettled, formerly enslaved people. The ship landed in Sherborough Island off the west coast of Africa, where sadly many colonists died of malaria. By 1821, the society secured the land that would become Liberia. ACS agent Eli Aries and Lieutenant Robert Stockton signed an agreement with 6 local leaders, offering goods worth about $7,000, adjusting for inflation. Throughout the 1820s, new ACS chapters sprung up in almost a dozen states. Virginia, which had one of the largest populations of free Black people, was among the biggest supporters with 21 chapters across the state. A handful of states would sponsor their own small colonies named after themselves that later became part of Liberia. Colonization had taken hold in white society, but to recruit Black colonists, these members would face off against
interesting stuff,
powerful and organized resistance.
Well, if you found that fascinating, you can watch the rest of it. That was about the first 6 minutes or so. But you can watch the rest of it on PBS's site. So it's called The Black Deportation Scheme They Don't Teach You About. And that's subscribe to PBS Origins. That's where they tell these cool origin stories. Now, can you tell that I once worked in live TV or live broadcasting? You got to come up with solutions on the fly. And then for the YouTube audience that is watching this, you wonder, Emma, are you gonna edit that stuff out? You post it on YouTube? And I say an emphatic fuck no. Because I know you're used to the manicured versions that you get on YouTube and so on and so forth, but with everything becoming so fake and AI created, I enjoy the thrill of theater in a world that has become also Hollywood. You know, Hollywood is fun until we start mistaking the players for real people. And that is very central to what's happening in this war right now. So let's get back into it. So we were talking about the cosmic microwave background radiation. And so heat is that connector, the information exchange. And with regards to the boundary, to that edge that it represents, that has everything to do with holographic projection. So the information of the entire universe is essentially encoded in this event horizon, in this edge, in this border of the universe, and it projects itself into all of its contents. So just like a child grows within the womb of its mother and it is subjected to every single thing that passes through her bloodstream, so too do we filter the information of the entire cosmos, and that is essentially what the throat chakra represents. All right, so we get this number. If we move on to 19 times 8, which is 162. Now, the significance of this 162 is that I don't know if I demonstrated this in another part, but we were talking about the triple numbers, like how 111 manifests a couple of different ways. Okay, and then how triple numbers manifest when you convert this is the formula for calculating how many electrons you would expect in each energy level, each orbital of an atom. So in the first level, 1 squared is 1, 1 times 2 is 2. So you expect 2 in the first level. In the second level, 2 squared is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. So you expect 8 in the second level, and then you get 18, and then 32, and so on and so forth. Now, if you do that up to the number 9, plugging it in there, each time I do this equation gives me a triple number. So if I did it with 1, that would be the equivalent of me doing 1 times 1 plus 1. And because 1 plus 1 is 2 times 1, gives me 2 again. If I did that with 2, 2 plus 2 equals 4. 4 times 2 equals 8. In the case of 9, 18 times 9 turns out to be the same thing as 19 times 8. It's fascinating, right? It's like a mirror almost. Okay, and The reason that that's significant because we're ultimately talking about 9 densities here. Like you can go any number of dimensions when you talk about the structure of reality, but at the end of the day, and this is a structure that was largely identified with a guy I trained with, Matthias De Stefano, but I found it to be very, very intuitive with respect to things I was already aware of at the time. But and you could call this from 0 up until 9, but we're really dealing with 1 through 9. But even with 0, it's the same thing. If I put 0 in here square and then times 2, I'm gonna get 0. If I put 0, 0, 0 in here, it's still gonna give me 0. So that's inconsequential. But for 9, if I do that for the 9th level, I get this number 162. So for whatever reason, if I think about my 19 code as an organization transformation principle for understanding the higher information and how it steps down into information that we can actually perceive and organize and so on and so forth. That's a 19, and then 8 is introducing us to the concept of basically why we're black. So this whole concept of a black background is exactly why you have black skin. At the end of the day, it is part of the holographic projection mechanism. And then once the information of the background is sufficiently programmed into the human form, that's when we ourselves become kind of a checkpoint for evolution. And so we can start doing variations. So that's how the other races come about. So once we became the new background, we became the new border. And then we could differentiate. We could say, okay, what else can we be? Oh, I could look like how Chinese people look now. Oh, if I move over here, I can mutate and turn into what white people look like now. But that baseline being is that black man. Okay. That first male child born to the first woman to become the template for what humans would essentially be. So until you have a woman and a man that, fit this mold or whatever, it's not a complete set yet. And so the sun represents that complete set. Okay. And so bringing it back around to Meru Prastar, where all this began, line 8 is the 9th in order. So because the lines are numbered 0 through 8, line 8 is the 9th in order. And it is associated with, just like that 3 is associated with 3rd dimension, this is talking about some 8th dimensional stuff. So that's some higher level, beyond transpersonal type stuff right here. This is where this is projecting from. So this is the void, if you will. This is the container in this particular context. Okay, this is where the Akashic record is found, according to Matthias' system. Okay, all the information, so the cosmic background of all the information is associated with this right here. Now let's talk about hell as promised. So I told you we were going to talk about Jesus' descent into hell. So if you don't know the story, he's on the cross. He finally, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? And he finally gives up the ghost, as they say. And there was a cracking in the sky and the ground. Like it was a big sign that he had passed on and everything else. But as the story goes, he descends into Hades, and basically to save those who had already passed on and were kind of like in purgatory or whatever else before he came. So basically there was no way to save the folks who were already dead before he ever came along. And so the story says that he descended into Hades and delivered those. Okay, so we know by now how some of that is figurative speech, and some of it does actually deal with what you experience in the out of body experience. Now let's talk about it from that standpoint first. So what is hell? And from those who have experienced the other side through these methods, and then I'll talk about what the Supreme Alphabet says about it, because our 12th letter L is called love, hell, right. So it basically tells the relationship of love, hell, and right. Okay. And from an OBE standpoint, there is no hell in the sense of there's just a burning place that is waiting for you because you didn't do what mama and daddy told you to do. The worst hell, the worst possible hell you can experience is the one that you create for yourself as a result of guilt. And remember, in what Raw was saying with regards to the way the Orion group utilizes martyrs to guilt you and can control, you're the warden. So one thing that you'll find, and then I'll actually show you where this is in the Messianic prophecy, because like I'm reviewing Numbers 24:17, where the prophecy that's associated with the Messiah is listed in the Bible and in the Torah. And I am blown away, like looking at it now. I'm absolutely blown away at how congruent it is with this concept I'm explaining here. I'm going to explain, but you are both God and devil, depending on which way that you leave here. Such that when you finally look at that being and you actually look at the face of this being, you realize it's a mirror. Like you could feel that it's a not quote unquote separate presence. Like you could see them over there, but you still feel it's you, as if you're standing in two places at the same time. Something that can only be experienced in 4 dimension or higher. And in the case of hell, you will, if you review your life and you look at those places where you withheld love. This is how Darius Wright describes this, and that's another person I trained with. This is how I learned how to do OBEs. He said there's nothing that you could do to a person on earth that will torture them more than how they will torture themselves when you are immersed in the palpable experience of unconditional love, and then look at those places in your life where you withheld love. It's kind of like imagine tasting the most amazing thing you've ever tasted. You know that feeling where somebody else has got to taste. Like it's so good, you can't believe this thing exists. Like it's almost like you subconsciously need some kind of confirmation that this thing is really happening to you, that it tastes so good. And so you have somebody else taste it. Now imagine having that feeling that is so good that you know you got that feeling that you got to let somebody else taste it, but you don't. For whatever reason, you say, nah, that person that I love more than anybody in the world and who I would love to experience this too, I'm not going to give them a taste of it today. I'll wait until tomorrow. And then imagine that person who was the top of your list to share that thing with, they die tomorrow. Imagine that. You could have shared that love with them, but you didn't. And now they're gone. Think about that for a moment. How does that feel? And that's just based on your capacity to love right now. Imagine when you're on the other side and you're now present and you remember what it's like for everybody to be immersed in unconditional love. And so just as high as that is amplified, the hurt you will feel as a result of feeling guilt for those times that you withheld love in life is going to be that much more as well. And so this is why it's important while we're still here to acknowledge those times, but to forgive ourselves. Because once again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I guarantee you the things that you were doing when you did them probably made the most sense in that moment. So it's not always that you had an intention to be neglectful or harmful or whatever else. It's just that whatever the circumstances were at the time, it made sense. So ultimately, what you're punishing yourself for when you don't forgive that is you're punishing yourself for reason and sense. Reason should never overshadow compassion, but at the same time, you still need discernment. Right? So, because that's what we said. This thing is about harmonizing. It's about balancing it out. The right amount to make the cake. Only the right amount of sugar, only the right amount of eggs, only the right amount of flour comes together to make a successful cake. You can't just be like, oh, I like eggs more than I like sugar and just I'm going to add more of this and take away more of it. It's not going to come out of cake. You're going to end up with a quiche and it's going to be disgusting. And so the same thing with hell. Okay, so just like we cleared up the word savior, if we're going to be quote unquote saved from hell, you need to understand hell as clearly as we understand savior based on the past couple of videos. Now, the word that is used, so all of this is stemming from, like, this whole 19 code. All of this thing that we're having this discussion about is stemming from Surah 74, where it mentions that, let's see if I've got the exact quote laid. Oh, okay. Yeah. So there were 19 angels guarding hell, which is called Saqar. This S-A-Q-A-R word right here. To test the faith of non-believers. That's what it's talking about in Surah 74. So this whole concept of the 19, like I told you in the introduction, is based around this surah right here. And, your boy, he found this. So Rashid Khalifa, he found this in 1974. So there was a lot of significance around this in his, as far as he was concerned. And we've talked a little bit about what angels are, what messenger, angel is. That's you. You are the guard of hell. You're the one, you're the warden. But until you pull off the mask and realize you're the one, you may not feel like you're the cause of your suffering, but you're damn sure the one reinforcing it. There's some things that can't be helped. But if you're continuously looping that thing and punishing yourself for something that you've already paid your debt for, you have nobody to blame but yourself. Okay? But we don't want to fall into a paradigm of blame because we're learning accountability. You could be accountable for something you didn't even do. That's just you stepping up and then taking the reins of leadership to say, I self Lord and Master. If things are going to get better, I'm at least going to contribute to it being better. All right. So let's look at what the textbook definition of hell actually is real quick. Let me go over to our good friend Wiktionary real quick. Put in some HE double hockey sticks. And this is going to jack you up a little bit. Okay, so from Middle English, hell. From Old English, hell. From Proto-West Germanic, halihu. Halju. From Proto-Germanic, haljo, meaning concealed place or netherworld. So that's more or less what you understand it. But it all comes from this kel right here, which is to cover, conceal, or save. Save? Wait a minute. Save is in savior? So there's a dual. This is telling you there's a dual type of notion to this. Because the same thing that keeps you in somewhere when you don't want to be in there can also keep you in there to protect you. So in other words, you are only in that hell that you create for yourself on the other side until you recognize that all you need is love. And I know it sounds reductionist, but once you experience love as an actual existent force and energy rather than something that you just understand intellectually, you realize exactly what I mean. Where what you're experiencing as evil or suffering is just the distancing from love. And in our definition of love, hell, right, which I think I should go ahead and give you. So now that we kind of see, like, how could the existence of hell be related to what saves us? You should already kind of be getting the idea that if you go from assuming that there's an external God that has nothing to do with you, and then you had a realization that you are that and that is you too, well, you got to also go to the other side of that and says, if I'm projecting this notion of an antagonist, if I'm projecting this notion of that thing is bad, there's got to be some of me woven into that too. So I need to be able to confront that and see why that is the case for me. Right? And so let's look at the definition of love, hell, right, according to the Supreme Alphabet. Remember, this is the 12th letter, so that corresponds to our English L. We'll do it off the top, but then let me do it so that you can see it too. Because this is probably one of the best clarifications you'll ever have for love. And then, like I said, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. Just try it on. Like the different stuff I tell you, just try it on for a while. And then just work with it as a paradigm for a while. See how it transforms your situation. Love, hell, right. Love is the emotion God blessed the woman with. Many men and women possess this emotion, and to those who have failed to cope with it has proven to be a handicap. Love to those who have gotten over this burden realize that love is understanding and not two separate qualities. Understanding brings on love or hate. Love brings on understanding. Hatred can be caused by what you understand or don't understand. Those who have realized the truth of love have proven that He is Lord. Lord is the equivalent of God, King, He, Father, And then mind you that these are based on the distinctions given in the alphabet themselves. And then there'll be a lesson for another day what the details behind what each of these capitalized words means within the context of it. But we have kind of touched on some of that distinction. But anyway, it's the equivalent of these, and thereby abides in paradise, which is heaven. Hell is the home of the ignorant, those who lack knowledge of self. God shows his love by manifesting the knowledge of himself through his wisdom, that's his woman, which reveals the hell one must go through in order to be right. Knowledge, the wisdom, to bring forth love, understanding. Observe and accumulate the facts of the ways and actions and words to bring forth love in terms of the mental picture drawn from your observation and actions, to see things for what they are, not what they appear to be. So in other words, to equate love with understanding is to say, let me observe and let me gather the information about you before I attempt to pass judgment. If I truly understand you, there is no judgment to be made. I can have discernment. Just like I don't hate tigers for eating people, but I'm damn sure not going to sleep in a cage with them. That's discernment. I don't have to have hate in my heart to make the decision that allows me to continue loving tigers. I just need to either take him back to his territory, or I put him in a nice, comfortable, humane environment, enclosure, wherever else, so I could continue to take care of him without that tiger also clawing my face off. Okay? Now apply that to the people in your life. Let's go back over here. All right, so Saqar. Now, Saqar is a very interesting word. So the hell that our society is in with regards to religion or whatever else is largely due to the misunderstanding of the word itself. I say that again. Your understanding of what Saqar is ultimately determines if you find yourself wrestling, struggling, suffering through this situation. Okay, so let's clear up some words. Let's clear up some stuff. Okay, so we got this root, this Saqar. Saqar. Sounds like this. Now, if I go back here, I'm going to take you over here, and we're going to go through this together. Okay, so I come over here and I type in these roots. So Saqara. What does it give me? So this root actually means to rise high in elevation or temperature. So there's an equating of making the temperature high, making it hot, to boil, and to actually physically rise. So we're talking about levitation. We're talking about elevation, climbing the top of a mountain, just getting higher on up there, going up through the levels. Derived onomatopoeically, meaning based on the sound that birds make. So from a bird of prey screeching cry, or the screech of steam escaping. So semantically, in the development of these words, we've got a parallel between the call of a bird, remember the crowing that I was talking about, and the concept of water becoming steam so that it can rise, so that the waters of the earth can rise to the waters of the firmament. Okay, so this is God separating the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. Okay. Incidentally, this may also be related to the Akkadian word that gives us ziggurat. which means to build high. So in the whole concept of the Tower of Babel, that's what they called those over there, ziggurats. You may simply be talking about the evaporation of waterfall, we know. But then conceptually, what we're talking about is the application of will and pressure to change something from one state to another. This is the underlying theme here. Okay, and so it is connected to Saqar or Saqar, who is an Egyptian god who appears as a hawk or a falcon. We're going to look at Saqar right now. Saqar is very fascinating for a few reasons, because he was known as a patron of the living as well as a god of the resurrected dead. Does that sound familiar? So if you were wondering how the word hell came to mean something concealing, covering, as well as to save, this is how those things end up in the same section. This whole concept of Jesus descending into Hades and then, ministering before the transfiguration, all of that is wrapped up just in the transformation of the meanings behind this word. Now, there's more to this guy. Okay, so because of this association with resurrection, he was often syncretized. Now, mind you, Egypt, the whole, like when you talk about Egyptian gods, they weren't all just concentrated in one place. You had like a bunch of different towns, different villages, if you will. And in each one of these places, like Memphis or Elephantine or whatever else, they had their own pantheons of gods. And so it was only when Egypt was united under, basically what happened with the United States, that they basically clumped all the gods into one, pantheon, and then simplified it and streamlined it in that way for bureaucratic purposes, usually. Okay, and so in this particular case, Saqar was often lumped in together with Osiris as a resurrection god, but he was also lumped in with Ptah, who was really, he was a chief god in Memphis already, but then he's the creator. So we've got this concept of the builder creator, just like the logos, the word, the Nagar. We talked about that, Jesus' occupation. You've got the resurrection folded into the Osiris element or whatever. So that also ended up with Jesus. And then, and in this case of being a patron of the living and the already resurrected dead. So not just simply resurrecting himself, but the one who's a patron of those who have been resurrected, like you see at the end of Revelation. So all of this is folded up into this one character that somehow has something to do with what is being guarded by the 19 code, the 19 angels. Fascinating. Now, his name is suspected to come from a meaning of cleaning the mouth. So in the previous video, when I was talking about the definition of Savior, according to the Supreme Alphabet, I showed you how that first part was associated with the number 57 and how those other numbers added up to 80, and then how 80 was the gematria for Pei or Fei, which means mouth. And so on the Arabic side of that is who opens. So who opens the mouth is associated with that number 80. Now, within that same line on Savior, they added up to 57. It also had the word possess. And then, I told you I didn't want to deal with that at the moment because we're going to come back to it. Now, remember, if I can get this marker to work here, I might have to switch colors. I done used up all my black teaching y'all. How about that? I might need to grab another marker. Let's see if I can get a hold of a blue or something that shows up pretty well on here. Nah, I guess I didn't want to use purple, but let's use purple. And that's what showed us. So many were called, but only one was chosen. And in this case, it would be the purple marker. Okay, so we talked about that 57. Okay, and then possess, remember it was associated with kaf final, which was tha in the Arabic letters, which was 23. So all in all, that same line that gave us that 57, which is 19 times 3, also possessed that 23, which happens to be the solution for b equals 2 in our Legendre equation, our 3-square equation before. Because 2 times 8 is 16, 16 plus 7 is 23, 4 to the 0 is 1. So we've got 19 times 3 facilitating this, 3 is understanding, and then we've got our equation that helped us convert our 7, our heat, before, and then that gives us 80. So this is linked to this concept of who opens and mouth. Now, if you don't know anything about Egyptian priesthood, they had these priests called the Sim priests who performed something called the opening of the mouth ceremony. So you can look that up on your own time, but just know that that is all being so when somebody died, they performed this thing called the opening of the mouth ceremony, and it had to do with the transition between the worlds. And you can once again look at that at your own time, but for whatever reason, all of that is pointing us right back to the same Saqar. Now here's the wild part. So Saqar was usually depicted as a mummified hawk, and sometimes as a mound from which the head of a hawk appears. Here he is also called he who is on his sand. Okay, so why this is significant is because, remember, the etymology, and matter of fact, this might be like the third, fourth time I've done this in a video, but I think it's probably like the most important thing that you can teach somebody that is religious with respect to who and what God is, the etymology of this word. Let's see. So it is derived from Middle English. We gotta go to this version. Okay. Let's see where it came from. So let's see. Essentially, it was a neuter, then changed to masculine to reflect the change in religion to Christianity. So this was both masculine and feminine. They recognized both sides of it. Remember, we had to add our one back in order to recognize both the masculine and the feminine contributions to this. And so ultimately from Proto-Germanic Gouda, which comes from that which is invoked, to call, to invoke, to crow, to recite. Is the same places we're getting these meanings that are at the root of Quran and Kara and crow and all this. Or libated, meaning pour as part of a liquid offering. So this concept of pouring and distributing is involved in there. And mind you, pouring is the meaning of the fourth Hebrew letter, dalet, which corresponds to the Arabic letter dal, meaning judge. So it has to do with the distribution of the Elohim. So the judges, the Elohim, the angels, the gods. So how did the one God end up becoming several? They are all aspects of the one. It's fractalization. And finally, an earlier meaning of libation made to specifically to an idol. Idol simply means image, and they made that mean so many things. But then when they were talking about idolatry, that was the idea of creating an image based on something rather than learning the actual geometric vibration of that thing through cymatics. And so the last part of this etymology is spirit immanent in a burial mound. That the Saqar sometimes depicted as a mound from which the head of a hawk appears. Remember, the ba, the part that remains after we die, the ancestor, the God part of us, it was often depicted as a bird with the head of a human. So this is what it's describing. And so when you bring in the element of the sand associated with Saqar, he's basically describing cymatics. So you verify the word by sending it through sand or water. By you actually seeing the shape of the sound, you know the shape or the image or the form that is supposed to go with it. So idolatry would be making up a form that does not match the sound. That's what it's meant. So it isn't simply just graven image the way you understand it on the surface. It's a matter of the wrong image. And that becomes particularly relevant in the conversation of the messianic prophecy, which I will go ahead and get into because I want to make sure I touch on that before we get out of here. So if you want that, you need to go to Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. But even more importantly, this thing still look what's going on here. Even more importantly, is it broken? What happened? They took the whole site down, so here we go. Dang. Gotta go through all that, Google. Alright, so you want the transliteration. So if you go to qbible.com, whenever you want to look up your verses, just look up, like if you want to know what something means or a particular verse, you put in Hebrew transliteration so that you can see the words broken down and then know what the words themselves mean in their entirety, not just the version that old King James or Mr. New International decided that those words should mean, because the Hebrew and the Semitic words and letters themselves have meanings inherent that aren't simply the surface meaning. Okay, so on the surface, the messianic prophecy reads, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Yaakov, that's Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Yisrael, which is Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Shet. Now, on the surface, it sounds exactly like it sounds. But let's look at what some of these words actually mean in the Hebrew. Okay, so this word that's being used for star is kokab. And yes, star is included in there, but it also means rolling in the sense of blazing. So we talked about heat with regards to Saqar. Remember that, the rising heat. We've got round, shining, and prince. So it tells us we're dealing with the 14th letter Nun, basically. Okay, when you see prince appear like that, it is associating the star with the prince. And the prince is Nun. Nun is the primordial waters from which, the materiality will emerge. So those concepts are being folded into star right here. And so this star is coming out of Yaakov. So there's a star. They made this out to simply mean that it would be from the lineage of Jacob. But even his name is interesting because remember, it means supplanter. So whatever's coming out with respect to this shine, this prince, this noon, this primordial substance is coming out of the supplanter, coming out of the usurper, the one who had the dream of the ladder. And a scepter shall rise out of Yisrael. Remember, Yisrael is the name that Yaakov took on after he wrestled with the angel Peniel. And I know how that word sounds, Peniel. He wrestled with the angel Peniel and then was given the name Yisrael. So let's look at those. Now, Peniel means the face of God. So what he was struggling with and what he was opposing was the face of God. When he recognized what the face of God looked, he said he was face to face with God and survived, is exactly what it says. And it says that a scepter arose. So this scepter only arose after he faced God. So he's seen God's face here. And the word that's used for scepter here is Shabbat. So same root that we get Shabbat. So you hear them folks in the New Wapians talking about Wu Shabbat and all this. That it's the same thing. It's just the feminine form of Sheba. Now, why is that significant? Well, the word that's being used for scepter, I'll go ahead and tell you from an esoteric standpoint that the scepter is a symbol for the element of fire. So fire, plasma, will, these same things we've been talking about. But the word itself here, it says it means rod, staff, branch, offshoot, club, scepter, or tribe. So there's a tribe, a clan that will rise out of this face of God. Now, remember what I was talking about with regards to the star. Remember, the star was the symbol of Inanna and Venus, right? And remember, her name, the cuneiform for the mush that was used right there, could mean either face or space. And so we was talking about wrestling with the face of God. He was also wrestling with the space of God, opposing the face of God, or facing God. Exactly what I just described. So in the OBE, where I encountered my higher self, I was having the hardest time getting to read. I was, to an extent, wrestling with the identity of this thing, because when you're in that state, you're receiving way more information than just what we normally get with our five senses. And for whatever reason, whoever this was, it felt like Jesus. It felt like my deceased biological father. It felt like Adi Yogi. It felt like all of these things, and yet it felt like me at the same time. So I was confused, and I probably would have excited myself out of sleep had this presence not told me to come and sit by him. And he was tall, like sitting down, he was still like a head or two, like taller than me. But he told me to sit down, and I had to go into like meditative posture and close my eyes. Like, this never happens in dreams. Like, I'm fully aware, and when I do so, it's like he basically just takes me through the steps of stuff I've been trained in. And so now I can see through my eyelids, but now I'm seeing stuff on the walls that I couldn't see before. So I'm able to see more of what's in the room. So he was basically opening up my third eye, I guess you could say that. And so when I finally turn back and I look at him, I realize who he is. Okay, I was like, oh, okay, this is like a higher perfected version of myself. Like, he looked just like me, except like, dude was jacked, boy. I'm talking about like he He was ripped, but but he didn't have like my beard and my mustache. So like he had like kind of had pretty much a clean face and had long like dreads way longer than mine. They kind of wore similar to what you'll see in like those Shiva or Krishna pictures, but it was definitely locks and just like this reddish brown color, beautiful skin color, like a glowing version of mine, maybe similar to mine, not quite, but just like it's like a reddish, goldish, brownish. Like it's not abnormal for something you would see from somebody today, but just like healthy and glowing color to it, and I don't mean like light coming out of it, like glowing. I mean like glowing, like when something's like healthy, like when a pregnant woman like has that glow on it, like it was that, but still at the same time felt radiant. But anyways, but dude was me. Like that was the whole point. And then mind you, when he entered the room, he didn't walk in, he didn't fly in. He literally poured out of the substance of the space itself. Like it looked like it was condensing and poured from the ceiling onto the floor, and then this transparent fluid gradually molded and darkened into the image that he ultimately ended up being in solid form. You know what I'm saying? And I've never seen anything like that in a movie. I've never seen anything like that really. Like the closest thing I could even compare it to maybe was like in Terminator. You know how in Terminator 2 how that was, but not even that. Like even that doesn't compare to it. It's more like just seeing the air become water and the water become a solid being type of situation. Okay, so I say all that to say what it's describing here in terms of a Messiah sounds very similar, like what's happened with Yaakov's transition into Israel. Is that it sounds very much like somebody who has had an out of body experience, and like if you hear other people describe it, they might not describe it the way I did, but between our explanation, you could tell we're talking about something similar, right? And so, but that's what it breaks down to. So the scepter shall rise out of Israel right here, and shall smite. So, you've got the word smite and destroy here, and it's fascinating here because smite actually also means destroy, but it's dealing more so with like a crushing. I'll show you what I mean with that. To dash, to shatter. So it's a shattering. Really shattering is the main takeaway. So the breaking apart of something. So we're going to shatter the corners. And then this word that's being used for corners can actually mean mouth. So the shattering the mouth, the direction, it can mean direction, region, or extremity. So what it's describing right here is the fractalization that was involved with the separating of the frequency that's associated with that cosmic microwave background radiation. Okay, so you're breaking up the corners, you're breaking up the mouth. This is the breaking up the speech at the Tower of Babel. And then it said it's doing that, it's smiting the corners of Moab. Moab means the father. So in other words, the potential. So exactly what I just said. So you're breaking up that supersymmetry, that potential, and then that is what ultimately generates the fractal pieces here. The distribution of the Elohim. All right. Then, so this other word that's being used for destroy is more along the lines of to break down, to cool down, to be cold, to wall up, to build a wall. So you're making them solid at this point. You're slowing this superheated plasma soup that the universe is initially, and you're cooling it down. Now there's a dual application to that, because two things I want to point out. So remember I was talking about Shabbat, so Shabbat with the T on it. With the Egyptian gods, they had a very similar function and construction to what wound up with voodoo, in the sense that you had what we call cool or rada spirits, and then you have what we call hot spirits, which we call petrol. And what would happen was you could basically arm a spirit for a particular reason. Let's say like you were going to war and you could make them hot tempered. You can do all this, but you would need to cool them back down afterwards, or else they could have negative consequences for you. So the same wrath that you directed at your enemy could come back on you. And so if you read the Bible, the Old Testament, through that lens, you realize that that's really what these people are doing with their patron deities. So even with Yahweh, that's essentially what this tribe is doing with it. They're basically just arming their respective deities, and in the cases where they did not appease them or cool them down afterwards, or whatever, that technology backfired on them. Their energy came back their way. Okay, and so what you'll find with Egyptian deities is that the men, the masculine, so you'll always have these pairs, the god and the consort. The masculine half is the unmanifest half. It's the potential. It has to do with forces in most cases. The woman, the female aspect, will be the material. So like when you look at the couplings of what they represent and what they are, the masculine form is usually something that's a force that isn't immediately tangible. It's a potential. It's an acting force. And then the female will represent a physical manifestation of it. So with Shabbat, when it's talking about this rod, staff, this tribe, it's making the distinction between the actual physical tribe of Shabazz versus the spiritual aspect of it in here. So this scepter that rises out of Israel, the one who is face God, who has seen the face of God. If you've seen the face of God, you're seeing it physically. All right. And so that father, so to destroy here, cooling down of all the sons, of all the children of Shet. So children, so the word they're using for children here can mean lifeless things, nations, guildsmen, or conditions. So we're cooling down the conditions of Shet, so Seth, so the third son of Adam and Eve, whose name means substitute or compensation. So we're talking about we're cooling down the conditions of compensation, or we're talking about lifeless things used as a substitute. So once again, this goes back to what I was just saying about idolatry. So whereas you've got the story of the one God discovery of Abraham, where I told you, you got the version about the sun, moon, and star, but then you've also got the story about him breaking the idols in his father's workshop. Well, idolatry isn't simply the physical, like having a problem with the physicality of something. It's dealing with having the wrong physicality of something. There's something that you're calling God, like there's something physical that, channels that, but you're labeling things that don't fall into that category. And then if you learn a little bit about African spirituality and African vocabulary and how that translates over into the West, many of those descriptions are essentially describing ourselves, as a form of Nkisi. So such that, like I told you before, we are a pre-existing intellect that helped to cultivate the hominin bodies here on Earth that we could incarnate into their genetic line. And so by that respect, these bodies that did not formerly have intellect, we are the intellect that come into it, and who ultimately shape it, like Ptah. And so you are a spirit in a mound. And if you subscribe to the idea that you're made of dirt, so it's the same thing. You're animated dirt. You're a spirit who has come into dirt. That's what it is to be incarnated on earth. So there's no conflict at all between me and it. So the whole concept of the Messiah, in this case, you see that this messianic prophecy that all of that is built on, it's talking about you too. You see what I'm saying? So Jesus is he's an entity that came and did what he did, but the purpose that he had to fulfill, he wasn't necessarily saying he was this. He came to tell us that all of us were that right there, the Messiah, like in terms of how you incorporate into a body, and then if you go to the other side, and then you witness the truth of who and what you are and what God is. Like that's something that's available to all of us, but they kept it secret. Like that was the closest guarded secret with regard to the Knights Templar with respect to like the chalice and the Ark of the Covenant and all these things that were romanticized or whatever else. But it's the information. It's the instructions of how you perform these out of body. Now I'll tell you right now, they used to do rituals and drug induced rituals and just different any number of ways such that you weren't just like my out of body experiences. I don't think they were longer than 15-20 minutes at the most, and there was so much that I experienced in that amount of time that it felt like I was in there for days. But they talking about actually being out of the body for 3 days, just like how you had Jesus. He was laid to rest and then rose again in 3 days. That's exactly what they would do. They would perform these rituals, and you take whatever you had to take and blah blah blah, and it'll basically put you in a state where you are out of the body for 3 days straight, and then you had to find your way back to the body. And then once you were back, you were never the same again, because you knew what it was like on the other side. You knew the truth. You witnessed God face to face, just like Jacob was describing right here, and it transforms you forever. Okay, so do I have time to get through this last little piece? I believe so. So to put a pin on this so we can move on to the next thing. So with regards to this description of the 19 angels and Saqar and how the angels are guarding them, it says there was not, and I talked about this a little bit earlier too, but there was 99 names of Allah, and they said there was one that was hidden or supreme. And they would describe the 99 names as 100 minus 1. So they're explicitly making sure that you recognize that the number 100 is involved. And that's the 19th letter. And so it says those believers will enter paradise. Remember what our definition associated with paradise was with respect to love, hell, right. It says that Lord is the equivalent of God, King, He, Father, and thereby abides in paradise, heaven. Now remember, Lord is He who has come to recognize that love and understanding are one quality and not two separate qualities, right? So we bringing this back over, so it is that who has conquered love, hell, right, who resides in paradise. Okay, and so remember 100 was associated with that cough, so that ape skull. Remember, we said that because we are still in this density and still want to be able to perceive that higher octave, we have to go through this guy right here, which I also associated with the Nakash. I demonstrated the linguistics around that to where, so the whole concept of the serpent or the shining one is that you've got a situation where you have the knowledge, but you don't quite have the wisdom yet. So this is our acquisition of the wisdom. So to come out of hell, you've got to acquire the wisdom. Be able to clarify the speech. Go from being the serpent to being the dragon. I see clearly. The one who can clarify. Jesus was crucified before he had that chance to clarify. And then we ended up with what we ended up with. Now, something fascinating I found when it came to this word was that you have a related word, instead of Saqar, you had Safar. And so if I go up, so how do we do this? All right, so matter of fact, let me go back to Saqar. Okay, so if I'm going up the ladder, of these letters, because remember, he's who opens the mouth. So if we go up to mouth, which is associated with the letter Fa, and look at Safar, we find that if we just go from that Q up to that back to the mouth, it means void, to empty. So this whole idea of opening the mouth or voiding the mouth is all contained in this same concept. And so if we put those up against each other, we have this concept of reverberating the skull with the the nasal, but then we've got the opening of the mouth so that sound can be audible. So we're bringing something into perceivable state here. When you're going down the numbers. Oh, that's not right. That should be 17th. My mistake, y'all. All right, but anyways, because 18th would be actually righteous, so that would be Sa. So Sasar. So we go Saqar, Sasar, Safar, Safari. Okay, but anyways, but that's descent, in other words. So we got ascent going up the numbers, descent down the opposite direction, but the same situation where we're moving toward the opening of the mouth in order to produce a physically perceivable sound. Now, Saqar, dealing with the rise, elevation, or the hawk and kite and eagle, all that stuff is tied to the root that bas, that's in Shabazz, which we break down again, the ba, which I said was that soul part. And then we've got a god called Bes, which is a principal deity down in Nubia and stuff. But ultimately what it's describing is that void. Now, let's look at the difference between these two numbers and what they suggest from a gematria standpoint. 99 suggests, so 90 would be Sa, and then the ninth would be Ta. So remember, Teth was the serpent in the basket, and then Sa, so this is either eternity or it's righteousness. And so we get this Satan, and it looks a lot like Satan or Shaitan or something like this, the accuser or whatever else. And interestingly enough, Satan in an Arabic concept means like robbery or theft. So we were talking about this concept of voiding, to empty. This is what we're talking about. And remember, Jacob was the usurper, the supplanter. So to steal, to take. So we're bringing that back. So bringing that one back, reintroducing that other one into it. So our kaf, when we're talking about this ape skull or powerful, whatever else, this 100th name of Allah, we're reintroducing that other ah, which gives us Sa'at, which interestingly in a lot of the colloquial dialects of the people in India, I ain't talking about the high noble Sanskrit, I'm talking about what everybody else speaks, the same way that Aramaic that Jesus spoke was the language that everybody spoke where he was at, instead of Hebrew. It means 7. And for whatever reason, it looks almost exactly like Tet, kind of like this 6, like the snake in the basket, whatever. So there's 7. So we're rising above equality by understanding how you go from the 99 names to the 100th name. So rising above the equality. And then we already talked about the ziggurat and Saqar and all that. So case in point, with this, we've had the opportunity to start shaking loose this notion of misunderstanding what the Savior was, misunderstanding what hell is, misunderstanding the purpose of the 19 angels guarding the Saqar in the Quran, the purpose of the 19 code in the first place, and clearing that up, and understanding that that was part of Jesus' mission. So it wasn't simply that he left before he had a chance to clear it up. It was because he told you, he said, you will perform greater things than I. Because we were equipped with the knowledge of self that would be necessary to activate Christ consciousness within ourselves and be able to clarify what he meant when he was teaching what he was teaching. Because it's very necessary in order to bring about peace and in order for us to not just be stagnant, but to continue to develop spiritually so that we can take better care of ourselves, access our capacity for healing. And remember, the word heal means to make whole, to make complete, instead of experiencing ourselves as something fractured. If you want to heal, you have to plug back into the whole. And that can only be done through understanding this higher dimensional perception we've been doing. So I will see you next time. I don't know if I'll be recording over the weekend. I've got all the ones I've done this week. I've got enough to have them automatically premiere on YouTube all throughout next week. So I'm pretty much good for a week after this one or whatever. But if I get time, I'll go ahead and move on to the next parts of the lessons, because to close out lesson 3, I'm really just going to show you some more with what happens when we look closer at how similar this Saqar is to the Koresh and Karash, like all the variants of that give us the name Christ in the first place. So we literally, depending on whether this letter associated with eternity or righteousness, depending on where we place it within the word, it's going to either give us hell or it's going to give us Christ. So save as a matter of keeping you preserved from things you aren't ready for, versus saved in terms of bringing you out when you are ready for the next stage. It's all embedded in this same phoneme and the letters involved in it and the math involved in it. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, and I will give you the 3 phonemes. Like, you should have figured it out by now, but it's 3 linguistic phenomena that if you understand those, you could pretty much unlock the secrets of everything. You could figure out how everything got so twisted up, how words got mixed up, but that's what we're here to do. We are here to clean up the language. We are here to see the one light, the projector behind all the different meanings and the projector behind all the different timelines, to rise up to that 5th dimensional understanding. So you done achieved 4th, at least from an understanding standpoint, and then now we're going to explore 5th a little bit more. And at the end of all of this, once we're done, I'll turn y'all loose with the techniques that you can use in order to actually activate these things physically in the body and experience it for yourself and all of that. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up, and I'm going to say peace, be safe this weekend. Boom.